know I cannot be the only one who is right here going, I'm going to treat myself to all the pretty places in my head. I'm like, what in the world has, like, how could I have not heard this song before? It is so science of mind, right?
And it's
I
Stevie Wonder.
imagine, I set an intention, I choose what I want to experience or how I want to interpret the experiences that I am having and what direction I want to go in. And I just treat myself to that's the direction of my life. That is how I will experience my life. That is how I will experience my life as a pleasure instead of as a punishment. My life can be pleasure, not punishment. And I know some of you grew up like I did in a religious tradition where you were told the best you could ever be is a sinner and you will be punished for all the things that you don't do or all the things that you do that you're not supposed to do. And it was all about running away from and being afraid of punishment. But we teach something very different. Now, having said all of that, I have a true confession to make. The title for today's talk is one word, pleasure. And I actually struggled with how am I going to talk about pleasure? And do I even want to talk about pleasure? And I realized that I had to slow down my brain because my brain was going to the automatic kind of collective consciousness, society, commonly used definition of pleasure. So maybe if I share with you what my process was, maybe it'll help you be like in alignment with where I am. So the theme for the year, the whole year is living out loud. What do we need to do? How do we need to show up so that we can actually say, feel, and demonstrate living our lives out loud? And the theme this month is self-care. And I had to slow down because on a superficial level, it was easy for me to think of self-care as maybe like pampering, going to the spa or doing pampering things. And I was like, but Tracy, from a spiritual level, what does self-care really require or mean? It's a demonstration of wisdom, of spiritual wisdom when I'm caring for myself. And then today's topic, pleasure. So again, from a secular or spirit or a surface superficial level, I was like, pleasure. Oh, well, you get pleasure because you go to a show or you're entertained by someone or someone treats you a certain way and that's really pleasurable. So I was like, all right, let's take it deeper. And from a spiritual level, I'm like, well, pleasure is when I'm living my life in a way that reflects the spiritual quality and truth of joy. The spiritual joy, not into being entertained and not whether I'm happy or not, but this deep residing joy. Once I did that, I was like, oh, I get it. I get it. In order for me and you to demonstrate self-care, we must tap into the spiritual wisdom that is already within us. Because if you think about it, self-care with the lowercase s is what we first think about. But if the creator of all of life is experiencing life in, as, and through me, and I look at self-care with a capital S, what am I doing to care for and to expand the experience of God as Tracy? How am I caring for the capital S self, the spiritual self? And what is it that the spiritual self wants to experience in me, as me, and through me to experience joy? So I hope you noticed that, like, I went this way to pleasure, and then I came back this way to pleasure, and now we're going to stay right there in that depth, because it is Father's Day weekend. It is Juneteenth weekend. And thank you, Dr. Rainbow, for those beautiful quotes to remind us. So as we honor fathers or the dads in our lives, or maybe it's not our biological father, but someone who really played a father figure role in our lives, I had to think about that. How did the wisdom of self-care, and how does the joy that is pleasure, how could I celebrate that or honor that in my dad? And as I share my dad's example, maybe you could be thinking about father figures in your life as well. And my dad is not in physical human form anymore, but he lived for 77, 76 plus years. And in his lifetime, he was born during a war. He lived through the pandemic, the Spanish flu epidemic in the 1919s, early 1920s. He lived through the Depression. He lived through the Korean War. He lived through World War, well, One and Two. He lived through racism, through Jim Crow. As an adult, he was raising a family during Jim Crow, then the Civil Rights Movement, and then all the things that happened in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And I think, how did he exhibit self-care? How did he exhibit pleasure in the circumstances of life that he had to live through? He faced racism every day of his life. He experienced a lot of challenges around debt and other financial related challenges. He was never allowed to be all he could be because of disabilities, physical health challenges. Yet, I have no doubt in my mind that I can honor that as he went through physical health challenges, he constantly modeled what we teach, even though he didn't know anything about science mind, in terms of making choices. Oh, when he had to have a leg amputated as a complication of diabetes, he chose joy. He said, the pleasure of waking up every day is up to me. And he learned to use a prosthetic. He learned to use a wheelchair. He learned to use tools and resources and connect with people who could help him. He had 4 heart attacks before the age of 50. He learned to change his diet, his food, and lived another 30 plus years. And it was his pleasure. He did not go through life as if that were a punishment. He said, I will be a deacon in my church, and I will lead, and I will serve. And I realize now what he was modeling for me is that when we are guided by our spiritual understanding, we are not limited. We do not have to live in a box that comes from society. What about you? When you think about trials, hardships, challenges that your father or other men in your life who were playing a father figure role, none of them were quote unquote perfect from a human standard. But what lessons did they model for you about how you can create pleasure? You can experience pleasure in a life that doesn't seem to be perfect. That's what I invite you to honor in those father figures who are alive today, who you recognize. I will be calling my nephew this afternoon and not just saying Happy Father's Day, like what presents did you get from your kids, but saying Happy Father's Day. And here's what I see you modeling: that is infinite intelligence operating as wisdom, and you modeling for your children and the world, choosing pleasure. The lyrics, again, from the song, that one line, that first line, that chorus line, that line that keeps getting repeated. I'm going to treat myself to all the pretty places in my head. Guess what? All the ugly places might be in your head too. Which ones do you want to hang out with? Which ones do you want to use to guide your life? The ugly places, the difficult places, the challenging places, the places that feel like huge mountains and you don't know how you're going to climb them? I'm not saying ignore those places. I'm saying use those places as stepping stones to get to the pretty places, the places that reflect who you are and how spirit wants to connect through you and with you. We're also celebrating or honoring, I prefer to say, Juneteenth. And I'm really pleased that that is now a national holiday. But I am also a little sad because so often when we have a national holiday, it gets relegated to, oh, it's a day off and we have barbecue and we get together with family and friends and we hang out and laugh and we play games and we completely forget or forget to slow down enough to honor what is it about. From a human perspective, we might say Juneteenth really is connected to struggle and, oh, those poor enslaved people. Yeah, we should celebrate that. The Emancipation Proclamation was finally shared with them 2.5 years later, and they were emancipated. But I'm going to challenge you to go a little bit deeper than that and breathe into the spiritual principle of freedom. In reality, freedom cannot be granted externally. Freedom cannot be withheld by any external force. And so when we honor Juneteenth and we stand in our spiritual knowing, then we want to acknowledge that Juneteenth is a day where we can all be delighted about and inspired by the fact that on that day, a tangible, visible, enforced belief in the inherent quality of freedom was a stand was taken for that. And in that way, we all have something to honor. Because I promise you, having ancestors who were enslaved, people who were enslaved, the majority of them had physical limitations put upon them by those who enslaved them. But before they came over from Africa, they already knew who they were. And I wouldn't be able to stand here today in front of you if there were not generations of people who were enslaved who said, those are the outside circumstances, but I know how to show up as love and with family and connection. And I know deep inside of me, I will walk tall. And if I can't walk tall, I'm going to hold the dream for my grandchildren or my great, great, great grandchildren to have opportunities I've never had, because I know inside that there is a God that is directing my life. So if you are going to honor, and I hope you are going to honor Juneteenth, then I want you to remember the spiritual quality of freedom. Not freedom given by a politician or freedom given by a society, but the inherent freedom being honored and recognized and enforced on Juneteenth. So each one of us, I just encourage us all to take that into our week and to remember then to apply it to ourselves with this idea of pleasure. What looks like struggle, what looks like limitation, what shows up in those ways is not the definition of who each one of us is. This week, think about pleasure. What brings you joy? Not just temporary activities. How do you allow spirit to live in you and through you? The work that you do, the relationships that you are building, are you honoring God's expression as you? This is the basis of pleasure. And when you treat yourself to all the pretty things in your head, you are honoring the infinite. Because the infinite is actually wanting to experience what it means to be human through you. So, closing question. When you think about self-care and you think about the importance of pleasure, and you add on to that, self-care with a capital S, what kind of time, what kind of life, what kind of experience are you showing God? You're the host for God. Your body, your choices, your experiences are the host for the experience of being human that spirit is having. When you invite people to your home, you lay out the best for them. You prepare for them. You make your favorite recipes. You make sure they're comfortable. Are you hosting spirit as you in a way that spirit can say, life as you, life as Tracy, life as J. Michael, life as Rainbow, life as Anu, life as Janice, life as me is a pleasure. And if you can't say that right now, then that's your assignment for the week. Start the redesign. Notice the pretty things in your head and begin to offer them to yourself and, in fact, to spirit, because you are spirit expressing. Take a deep breath. And if you know this closing prayer, which I'm going to do as a chant, if you know these words, feel free to say them quietly to yourself 8 times. There's only one life. That life is God. God's life is perfect. God's life is my life now. There's only one life. That life is God. God's life is perfect. God's life is my life now. There's only one life. That life is God. God's life is perfect. God's life is my life now. There's only one life. That life is God. God's life is perfect. God's life is my life now. There's only one life. That life is God. God's life is perfect. God's life is my life now. There's only one life. That life is God. God's life is perfect. God's life is my life now. There's only one life. And that is God. God's life is perfect. God's life is my life now. There's only one life. That life is God. God's life is perfect. God's life is my life now. And so it is.